This video lesson is about using a ruler and protractor. You might think you already understand how to use a ruler, but there's some pretty common mistakes that even adults make. So I expect students to make some of these mistakes too. So the ruler has two sides. The metric side, which is measured in centimeters, and the standard or US customary side, which is measured in inches. And in the United States, we measure a lot of things in inches. And I think as you really understand the difference between inches and centimeters, you might think it doesn't make a lot of sense, but that's what we do. So if you look on the inches side, and as I'm looking at this, I'm realizing that this picture of a ruler is not the best example because it's missing some tick marks, but it's already copied in your notes. So instead of redoing it, we might just, instead of me finding a new picture, we might just look at this and then talk about how your ruler is going to be different. So typically, inches, the inch out of a ruler will be measured in 16ths. But if you count with me, we've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 different tick marks. So really what that means is that each of these tick marks, so these little lines, call that a tick, each of those is 1/8 of an inch. Now, that's not really common. So I'm going to go ahead and label these. So we've got 1/8. 2/8 is the same as 1/4. So 1/4. I guess I should probably write 2/8 above. Then we've got 3/8. And then 4/8, which is the same as 1/2, or 4/8. All right, so then that's 5/8, 6/8, 7/8, and then right here, 8/8. That makes one whole. So in a regular ruler, you're really going to have marks in between these. So a regular ruler, oh, sorry, it's really hard to draw on my iPad. A regular ruler will have 16ths. So on a regular ruler, each small tick mark is going to be 1/16 of an inch. So when we measure, we have to use fractions or mixed numbers here. Because if I were to measure to this mark right here, and I'm going to go ahead and put my 16ths in right here. If I were to measure to this mark, this would not be 3.2. Instead, it would be 3 2/16 or 3 1/8. All right. The centimeter side is much easier to measure because it's the metric system is measured in tenths. So if you count, now this side is, this should match your ruler. There should be 10 tick marks from the edge of the ruler till you get to the first centimeter. So this way we can use decimals, which is really nice. So if I were to measure something that came to right here, oops, sorry, you can't see what I'm writing. All right, so if it was from here to here, I could just say, okay, well, that's going to be 2 centimeters. And then I could count over 2.1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. So that would be 2.8 centimeters. All right, to participate in this example in your notes, you will need to get out your ruler and measure along with me. I know it looks a little different on here from what you have, but it's the same example.
All right, in this video, you're using rulers and protractors, and for this first question, it says measure each segment below to the nearest 16th of an inch. I only want you to do the very first one in class, the top left one, or excuse me, in your notes. The other ones, we're going to practice some more of that in class. So first of all, if you're measuring with inches, you need to make sure you're on the inch side of your ruler. And I have both a clear one and a darker one, so it's a little easier to see. And remember that in a ruler, the ruler is not, on the inch side, is not divided by tenths. So if I start all the way over here, this would be 0. I'm going to always start at this first tick mark. And then between 0 and 1 inch, the longest one in the middle is a 1/2 inch. These next medium length ones are quarters. So this would be 1/4, 2/4, 3/4. Then if we look, the next tallest ones mark off 1/8, and the smallest ones mark off 1/16. So a really common misconception is that if you measure a line that comes out to here, people will say that's 1.1. But remember, 0.1 is 1/10 and not 1/16. So we're going to use mixed numbers when we measure with a ruler in inches. Centimeters, however, you can use decimals. So we're going to measure this. I'm sorry, I'm holding my phone. It's a little jiggly. No matter what type of ruler, you want to make sure that you line up. I'm going to get real close here. That you line up the ruler, you zero it out as precisely as you can, because that's going to really impact your measuring. All right, so if we look at this, we're going to count over 1 inch, 2 inches, and then, this is real hard to tell. So when we get here, we want to make sure we're real precise. It looks like 2/16 or 1/8, but let's just make sure. I always double check, make sure we're totally lined up. We're totally lined up. All right, so we're going to call this 2 inches, and then if we say that's going to be 1/16, and that's going to be closest to 2/16. So you could say 2 and 2/16, but we could also simplify that and say that's 2 and 1/8, because we can simplify 2/16 to 1/8.
All right, the protractor, the only thing I really want to point out right now is that the protractor is going to have 2 scales. And so you always need to pay attention that if you're measuring and the part of your angle lines up with this part of the protractor, you're always going to start at the scale that starts at 0. So like when we measure anything, we start from 0. So if I measure using the left side of the protractor, I start on the top scale and measure over. If I start on the right side, I'm going to use this bottom scale that starts at 0, and it's in blue in this picture, and measure over. A couple important things that you'll hear me point out in the next example is there should be either a hole, or if you have a protractor like this one, there should just be a place where the zeros meet, and that's where your vertex of your angle has to be. And then it's really important that you're really precise lining your protractor with your angle. So if you look at the second example of measuring an angle in your notes, we're going to measure the same one together. I know my paper looks a little different than yours, and just bear with me. This is the first time I've recorded a video in a video, so I'm not sure how it's going to go.
All right, next we're going to practice measuring an angle, and I did something to the angle we're going to measure before even starting the video, and the only reason I didn't film it is because it was too difficult to hold my camera and do it at the same time. But what I did is I took a ruler, and my original angle stopped right here, if you can kind of see on your paper where it's printed. I took a ruler and I lined it up with that, and I extended that line with my pencil. So if you could go ahead and do that first on yours, and then I'm going to explain to you why in just a second that I did that. Normally I would explain it while I'm doing it, but I'm holding my camera with my hand and it's too hard to do both. Okay, we're going to measure angles with protractors. So the protractors can look really different. This one has a little arm that can be real helpful. Most of you don't have that kind, so I'm not going to use that. But we need to know how to set up our protractor. So there should always be, if you find on the scale where there's 0 and 180, if you follow that horizontally, there should always be either a hole or a marking. Sometimes this is at the bottom of your protractor, and there's not a hole. And then if I follow it the other way, I should be at 0 and 180 over here again. So on this green one, you can see that hole is actually going to be the hole that's in the arm, and that's going to line with 0 and 180. Now, if you have a protractor that doesn't have a hole, that's fine too. You might need a little help from me in class if you're not sure how to set it up. But there should be a point on your protractor where it's kind of zeroes out right here in the middle. So we want to line this hole up with the vertex of this angle. So we get our vertex, we can see it in the hole where those two rays come together, but there's something else we have to line up. Hopefully you notice on the protractor, sorry, I know the camera's real shaky, that there are these little whiskers right here that come out of that hole. one side of the whisker has to line up with this angle. So when I go to put this back, I'm gonna make sure I can see my vertex, but my whisker right here is not aligned. So I'm gonna rotate it, and it's really tough. It's easier to do with two hands, but I'm holding my camera. I want that vertex dead center. There we go. Okay, hold on. I guess maybe not dead center is not the right word, but as central as possible. Okay, now you can see that my whisker lines up. All right, so when we're measuring this angle, I need to know next which scale to use. Am I going to use the bottom scale or the top scale? Well, when we're measuring, we're going to start at 0. So we're going to use the bottom scale in this case. You can use the left side of the protractor to measure, and if I was using the left side, I'd be using the top part, but that's just not how I lined it up. Okay, so we're going to start over here at 0, and I think now you're going to see why I extended this line earlier. So as I trace over here, I just look for, okay, where do I see that line? It's up here. I'm using the bottom scale, so this is close to 110 degrees. Now, if you notice, kind of right where I'm pointing, this is where the original angle that I printed on your worksheet ended. But you don't want to use this. This is why I asked you to extend that line using a ruler, because if we really extend this, we can now get the angle to run into the scale on the protractor. So if I look, if this is 110 degrees in this line, and it's kind of between two, but it's closer to this tick mark, that means that it's really going to be 1 degree less than 110. So this is approximately 109 degrees. And now we can confirm that it should be 109 degrees. You've learned before in middle school about acute, obtuse, and right angles. We know acute is less than 90, obtuse is greater than 90, and a right is 90. You know, I should do that, make that. Come on, Miss Collins. All right, sorry, I've got a case of summer brain. Okay, so this is acute. This is just an example of an acute, an example of an obtuse, and an example of a right. So a quick way to make sure you use the correct scale here is that I got 109 degrees, and I can see this is more open than a right angle would be. And if I kind of line this back up again, if I use the wrong scale, I would have gotten 71 degrees, and 71 degrees would be an acute angle. So that's just one way you can check that you use the correct scale.